someone stole it. It's gone. I was going to show you the First Nations version so you could see it, and it has disappeared. That's all right. Got up and walked away. Okay. The First Nations version was published in 2021, and when I started becoming familiar with it, finally getting a copy of my own, the thing that I was most struck by in reading it was the names. In today's story, we have Stands on the Rock, Father of Many Nations, He Made Us Laugh, Heel Grabber, Great Spirit, Giver of Life, Spear of the Great Waters, People of Iron, Giver of Breath, Maker of Life. And finally, Creator Sets Free, the name that's given to Jesus. The name Jesus, Yeshua, has often been said to mean God saves. And I find the translation in the First Nations version to be a refreshing and a faithful one, as salvation and liberation must be one and the same. It got me thinking of my own name. Here, I am Pastor Alexa. Sometimes organizations write to the church, writing formal letters to the church addressing Reverend Eisenbarth, which is very strange. But I'm not sure if you know this, but outside of this space, beyond the auspices of the church and my official station here, I go by Alexa. With family and close friends, I am Lex, or sometimes Lexa. When I was a kid, one friend and one friend alone called me Al for a time. Then that nickname just disappeared one day. I really wanted to be an Allie, so I tried it out for one season of soccer, but it just was not me. I am Alexa. I am Alexa Nicole Eisenbarth. I am Alexa, named by my mother. I am Alexa, named after Billy Joel's daughter, Alexa Joel. My sister is Carly, after Carly Simon, if you need help imagining the love of music in my family. I am Alexa Nicole, because Cole is my grandmother's maiden name, a name held by beloved family members who have now passed on. I am Alexa Nicole Eisenbarth, because Eisenbarth is my dad's last name. It is an Austrian name, meaning ironsmith. Because my name is Austrian, one would assume my biological ancestors were Austrian, but no, I hold no Austrian ancestry. Instead, I hold ancestry from the British Isles. But my last name tells me that someone with Austrian heritage loved my ancestors, married them, and loved their children. At least I hope that's the story. In my house growing up, first in my bedroom and then in my laundry room, there hung a framed piece of paper with my name typed in beautiful font, and underneath my name was its meaning. Alexa, from Alexander, Defender of Mankind. Defender of Mankind was a title that shaped me. It is a name that holds power for me. Alexa, Defender of Mankind. I took it seriously, or it fit me well. I'm not sure which. I ended up using my office and my title as a pastor, as reverend, to advocate for justice for the least of these. Names hold profound power. As we said last week, words, and names are words, create worlds. And our names are words that we live in, that we inhabit. Our names are a home for us, sometimes an identity, and sometimes a call. The other naming that happens in our text for today from The Good Story Continues, or as it is often called, the book of Acts, or Acts of the Apostles, is the naming of the guilt of the people and naming the power of God in spite of their guilty acts. The crowd is its own character in the Gospels. The good story, as the First Nations version puts it. And spilling over into Acts, this remains true. where the good story continues. The crowd, this character, is fickle, sometimes listening intently to Jesus' words, being fed miraculously by Jesus and the disciples, being baptized en masse, watching his miracles with awe. But other times, the crowd is trying to throw him off a cliff, literally, whispering that he was a blasphemer, whispering, "Who does this guy think he is?" And once, on the last day of his life, screaming, "Crucify him." Then it was the Passover festival, and the land was occupied by the Romans, the people of iron. But the people of iron were a bit smart in their occupation. This was a little bit different than previous occupations of the land, at least of this place. The Romans, the people of iron, appointed people to serve in each of the local lands with some tie or ancestral heritage connected to that land. So maybe if the Romans were in charge of Austria, they might send me with an Austrian name, even though I have nothing to do with Austria. So they would send people with some sort of tie to govern that land, so that the people, at least in facade, were supposedly being represented in their governance. And they let the people in each local place continue practicing their local religions, with one caveat. At least in this place, in Judea, the Romans assumed the right to appoint the Jewish high priest, meaning that the temple leaders were in empire's pocket. They were coerced and encouraged and incentivized to act and lead with the empire's interest in mind. They did all of this in an effort to maintain Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Of course, by peace they mean no uprisings, for peace without justice is really no peace at all. So the governor of this area was Pontius Pilate, or Spear of the Great Waters. And the high priest was Caiaphas, whose name in the First Nations version, we didn't hear it today, but his name is Hollow in the Rock. Hollow in the Rock. Hollow in the Rock and Spear of the Great Waters, Pontius Pilate, both had to sign off on Jesus' crucifixion. And they both did at the urging of the crowd. As a foil to the corrupt Jewish temple leadership at the time, Hollow in the Rock, Jesus told Peter, stands on the rock, that he would be the rock upon which he would build his church. So you have Caiaphas, Hollow in the Rock, and against him, Jesus tells Peter, who is not the high priest, that he is the rock upon which Jesus will build his church. Peter stands on the rock, does not stand on hollow ground, a facade alone, but on something true and whole. And he can do this not by smoothing over what has come before, but by incorporating all of their past, including the harm, the sin of the past, the tragedy of the past, with the story of Great Spirit's continual movement and life-giving action, the good story that continues on. Now, we don't know if each person here in front of Peter, the crowd, are the exact same people who were in the crowds hearing Jesus chanting, "Crucify him," but they are people who share the same identity with them. They are both the crowd, but they are also sharing the same herd mentality of crowds. They are blown by the same wind. They claim the same faith, and they are expressing the same disdain and doubt as the crowds who came before them. They're in a long line of traditions of the crowd. They are people who did not stop the crucifixion of Creator Sets Free, but instead egged it on. They are people who freed a murderer, Barabbas, instead of Creator Sets Free, Jesus. Jesus, Creator Sets Free, was killed in their names as people of faith, as Judeans, as Romans, as the crowd, as humanity. Peter names what has been done. naming what we have done or what has been done on our behalf in our name, in our representation. Naming these things is the first step of healing them. And finding a rock to stand on that isn't hollow, but a firm and whole foundation upon which to build a new world. Sankofa is a word from the Twi language of Ghana's, I'm going to say this wrong probably, Akan tribe, that means to retrieve or to go back and get it. It comes from an Akan proverb, which means it is not taboo to go back for what you forgot or left behind. Sankofa is a phrase that encouraged people to learn from the past in order to inform the future and to reach back in order to move forward. There are many people who go on Sankofa trips down into the American South to learn about the institution of slavery and the civil rights movement in order to learn from the past and move forward renewed for the future. So in regards to our history, in regards to all that has been done in our name toward Native Americans, people indigenous to this land, we must tell the truth. We must name what it is. I can't possibly name all of those things today, but we will begin. In our land acknowledgement at the start of this service, we name that we are on the land of the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes. I, to be honest, had not heard of the Medicine Creek Treaty. And so I did some learning this week. You may all know this if you've lived here, but it's good for all of us standing here on this land, brought to this place by the blowing winds of the world, to know what has been done in our name to the indigenous peoples of this place. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1854, leaders of several tribes and bands were invited by U.S. government officials, including a man named Isaac Stevens. This is important for later, to participate in a potlatch at Schwanham Creek, or Medicine Creek, today also known as McAllister Creek, which is now named after a white settler. This information comes from a video published by the Puyallup tribe of Indians. The video says this: "To their surprise, they were met with official documents asking them to sign away their lands. After 3 days of poorly communicated negotiations, a few of the tribal representatives, not speaking or writing English, signed their X's on the Medicine Creek Treaty. To this day, it is believed that many of those X's were forced, if not forged. With this, 3 reservations were created, one at Puyallup, one at Nisqually, and one on Squaxin Island. Not only were the original reservations too small to comfortably fit all of our people, but they were also poorly located, away from the resources that had sustained them. As a result of this miscommunication and abuse of power, their people went to war. In an attempt to destroy all evidence of indigenous cultures after this fact, the settlers burned indigenous longhouses, took their canoes and destroyed them, and took their utensils and destroyed them. So from 1855 to 1856, war ensued on this very land. These battles, called the Treaty Wars, took place in many places around the Salish Sea, here in the South Sound up to Seattle. Many Washington Territory tribes came together in solidarity. Puget Sound tribes traveled over the Cascades to support the Yakima relatives, and then they did the same for the Puget Sound tribes as well. The final battle took place in modern-day Bonney Lake, not far from where I used to go to Home Depot. In 1856, there was a renegotiation of the treaties, and that took place on Fox Island. This renegotiation expanded and or relocated existing reservations and added the Muckleshoot Reservation. All of this was done in our names. It was done in our names as Americans. And for those of us who are white, whose ancestors settled here sometime in the last 175 years, this was done in our name. What's more, in the 1870s, Protestants, so not Catholics, but Protestant Christians, were put in charge of residential schools under Ulysses S. Grant's Indian Peace Program. Pax Romana, anyone? At Fort Simcoe in White Swan, just over the Cascades from here, a residential school run by Methodists was there. The Methodists in the Pacific Northwest were put in charge of the residential schools here. So all the residential schools in the Pacific Northwest run by us. So Fort Simcoe was one of these residential schools. It was run by Methodists, and it was meant to, quote, teach the Yakima, especially, productive skills that would help them better assimilate into American culture. The school's proponents believed that Native children were the most salvageable members of the tribe. This process involved eradicating any trace of Yakima culture among the students. Boys' long hair was shorn, and Yakima names conferred in religious ceremonies were discarded as the students were baptized as Christians and given proper Christian and American names. Among the names students were given were Christopher Columbus, Daniel Boone, Isaac Stevens, after the territorial governor who Yakima say forced them to sign a treaty under duress. Other names, William Penn, Abe Lincoln, and Mark, Paul, and Luke. In our name, as Methodists, as Christians, we named the people we colonized with the same names as their colonizers. In our name, Methodists tried to stamp out indigenous cultural practices, names, and stories. In Voices of the Northwest Coast, a video published by the American Museum of Natural History, an indigenous woman, Jisgang Nika Collision, says this: Western people, settlers, they don't need to be afraid to look back. They need to look back just to understand the history, understand what modern North America is built upon, hey? I think when we do, we can see the name, the hollow rock modern North America is built upon. We can start to identify more solid rocks for us to stand on, upon which to build another world. And we can name the ways that God is still at work. My friends, in our presence are Native Christians, people for whom they hold a Native, indigenous identity and find deep meaning in Christianity. How? By miracle alone. And so today we begin to support Native American ministries in our area. One of those ministries is called Circle of Indigenous Ministries. That's a ministry of our conference. One church that exists in the Portland area for tribal members is a Methodist church that incorporates indigenous practices into their worship. It is beautiful. And it is a sign of God's work despite all we have done. Amen.